for this Q&A session. So what we'll do, just for the listeners out there, we'll have about 12 minutes of Q&A, and then I'll ask the three of you to give a 30-second closing comment, just your key point you want people to remember today, and then we'll sign off. But Aaron, so days to maturity with the cultivar came up a few times this year, trying to get ahead of heat if possible, and for particularly during the flowering stage of canola. Do you have any advice for farmers and agronomists on the days to maturity choice?
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So growers, of course, are aware of what growing season zone they're in. So in the short season, you're often limited, but in the long season, you do have an opportunity to choose different lengths of season. And you know, if I told you to grow a short season variety in a long season zone, the heat would probably come at exactly the wrong time. So it is very hard to predict when that heat's going to come. But my best advice would be to change it up a little bit and to perhaps consider some varieties that are a little bit of a longer season and have some that are shorter season to really make sure you don't have all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Aaron. Okay, I've got a question for Clint on the resistance genes labels for blackleg. So with that example you gave, Clint, that chart, a lot of the hybrids or cultivars didn't have a gene identified. So you know, if you're a farmer buying one of those, how do you know what gene it has? Or yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so that is a challenge, certainly. We know that not all cultivars or varieties or hybrids or whatever you want to call them have the R gene labels for blackleg out there. So what we're encouraging producers and agronomists to do is to talk to the seed company directly as to what they would recommend for rotating between their products. I know, like, due to limits of time, I didn't really have an opportunity to talk about quantitative resistance very much. Most seed companies in most of their products do have that quantitative resistance. So that's that dimmer switch resistance operating in the background. And a lot of times they'll have like an R gene stacked on top of that quantitative resistance. But one of the challenges as an industry, we don't have a way of measuring that quantitative resistance, how much is in there just yet. We're maybe still a year away from having that technology or that rating available. So in the meantime, what we are encouraging growers to do is to have a conversation with the seed company directly to find out what they would recommend in that situation if they believe that their quantitative resistance is sufficient enough. But unfortunately, it's hard to know exactly how those products are going to perform in a specific field until one, you know what the races are there, and then two, what the major resistance genes are. Then you can have a very good idea of how to manage that risk. So it's still a little bit buyer beware, unfortunately, with some of those products that are still out there.
Thanks, Clint. All right, so we're going to come back to you with this next question, Clint, but I want to give it to Brittany first. All right, actually, it's very timely. It has to do with the dry last year. All right, so with the dry conditions in 2021 and even before that in some areas, so the question is about clubroot and blackleg spores coming out of those dry years. Here's the question. If we return to normal moisture levels, at what part of the growth cycle of the canola plant is moisture going to elevate the spore load of both clubroot and blackleg? Okay, can you address that, Brittany?
Partially. So there was quite a few questions that came up this year with the dryness and how the spores respond, and if we, I don't know, not necessarily solve clubroot, but if the spore load has drastically reduced. There isn't a ton of research yet on dry conditions or the timely amounts of moisture, but I can tell you this. So dry conditions do not kill spores, clubroot spores specifically. I'm only speaking of clubroot. So dry conditions do not kill spores, but we do know moist conditions increase the germination of spores, and then also those flagellas on the zoospores require water to move to the host. So when we remove that, we're not getting the germination, and then if any spores do germinate, they have to get to the host by swimming. So clubroot is actually quite surprisingly difficult to grow if you don't have the appropriate conditions. So if you have a cooler environment or it's quite dry. Clint has seen probably more clubroot than you might have thought in a dry year. Unfortunately, I wasn't out in the field as much, but I saw in my greenhouse I had like 1 billion spores per gram of soil, and I didn't water it at the appropriate time, and I had no clubroot symptoms. However, we do also know with canola and the spores that the plants are most susceptible at a younger stage, and we need very few days to have that secondary infection. In a like optimal environment, it only needs 7 days post inoculation to create those galling symptoms on the canola plant. So yeah, a couple dry years is not going to really help us specifically with clubroot. Once we get that moisture in the spring or over the winter, they're just going to be, yeah, they're gonna be going.
Yeah. Okay. Clint, what about dry years in Blackleg?
Yeah, so I agree with Brittany, is that we had a little bit of a reprieve this year for a lot of the diseases. Sclerotinia, blackleg, clubroot were all down, but that pathogen population is still there, and it's waiting for us. So once we get back to kind of wetter conditions, we'll expect to see a resumption of those diseases. But there's one other disease, and that's verticillium stripe, which is predominantly in Manitoba, creeping westward as time goes on. That pathogens seem to do just fine in the really dry conditions and reproduce quite a bit. So unfortunately, we can expect that the diseases are still going to be there even coming out of a drought.
Hey, Clint, just to stay with the hybrid theme or the cultivar selection theme, do we know anything about differences between cultivars for verticillium resistance? Not
yet. The verticillium research is still in its infancy. We don't even have a good model for yield loss just yet. We're hoping that should be done here this year. And then from that, we should have a screening methodology that we can start putting cultivars or varieties, hybrids through to determine how much resistance that there potentially is. We are getting some indications that there might be some resistance in the germplasm, but it's really early days to know for sure. Just keep an eye on this space, because unfortunately, verticillium, I think, is joining the big three canola diseases to become the big four, and it's going to be something we'll have to come up with some solutions on as time goes.
Okay, well, I'm going back to you again, Clint, with a blackleg question. Does quantitative resistance stop the blackleg pathogen from reproducing?
Good question. No, it doesn't. Major gene resistance does, but quantitative resistance, the pathogen still gets into the plant, still is present in the canola residue at the end of the season, and therefore, once that plant is dead, then it grows saprophytically, so decomposing dead tissue, and is able to reproduce and produces more spores. So relying solely on quantitative resistance, unfortunately, it does increase the pathogen load in a field as compared to major gene. The ultimate solution is actually having a quantitative resistance, which slows the disease down, put the major gene on top that is good against those races, and then you've got the full package that works really, really well. Lots of science that shows that the stack of those two systems is the best.
All right, one more question for you, Aaron, and then Brittany, I'm coming back to you with one on being proactive, but we'll do Aaron's question first. And this is a good one, and it's not necessarily a trait decision, although it could be a treatment decision. So are these products that claim to enhance root development and then improve yields ultimately? What do you think of those, or is it still best to stick with a balanced fertilizer program until we know more about these other products?
Yeah, it's amazing how many of those products come out of the woodwork when there's high fertilizer prices. So from my perspective, I would look at these with a bit of a skeptical eye. Maybe that's just my nature, but that's how I would approach them. I'd ask for some really good, robust trial data, hopefully some scientific research that would explain the process by which these products perhaps lead to yield enhancements. You know, it's one thing to show a great picture of a bigger root, and roots are important for water uptake, for nutrient uptake, but a slightly bigger root in one side-by-side picture with a ruler is not going to result in yield increases across your field. You know, sometimes I have products come across my desk that say, look how great this improved yields in rice in the southern US. It will definitely work in canola and in Saskatoon. And I just shake my head. So it's certainly buyer beware with those. But by all means, if you want to try something on your farm, I always encourage people to do a test strip and check it out. But do be careful, and certainly in a year with high fertilizer prices, just keep your eyes out.
All right, so Aaron and Clint, think about your sign-off question, or your last words, because I have one more question and then we're going to be done. And Brittany, this is for you. So just, and this will be you emphasizing a point you already made, but I think there's a lot of farmers in areas where clubroot really hasn't been a major problem yet. So the message to use clubroot resistance perhaps doesn't make sense. but the keeping spores low, this is where I want to go. So how would you describe why all farmers should consider clubroot resistance with that goal of keeping spores low? Why is that so important?
Yeah, so I think we need to be honest with ourselves as to how much we're actually scouting, and are we going to every field every year, pulling roots, pulling plants, going to those high-risk areas? It is a soil-borne disease. There can be quite a bit of spores in the soil without seeing even symptoms on the plant. So when we increase spore load in the soil and then see these above ground symptoms, which are typically now close to 1 million spores per gram of soil for them to affect the plants above noticeably. And then we subject those resistant cultivars to that sort of pressure, we're going to have we can break down these genetics in just 2 growing seasons. Yes, 2. So, and on the 3rd cycle, you'll start to see the breakdown. That's what I'm trying to say. So we don't want to expose these cultivars to such high pressure after we found these really, I guess, infected areas and then use it. And so I suggest, yeah, it should just be almost like a black leg. It should just be involved in every cultivar so we can avoid those high risk situations for creating new pathotypes. Or I shouldn't say creating, but for identifying those novel pathotypes that resistance has not maybe been commercialized yet for it, or to the same robustness as the Mendel resistance package. So there's a lot to learn about this resistance. Mendel seems to be has a lot of pathotyping, resistant to a lot of pathotypes, but we don't know how durable all the other packages are yet. So we just need to try to keep that resistance as long as possible, and that's just to decrease pressure on those resistance genetics in fields. So by keeping spore loads low. I rambled.
Yeah,
I do that on clubroot.
Yeah, that's it. Well, with something so complex as clubroot, it's not hard to get going. Okay, we're going to go in reverse order, 30 seconds each, and then I'm going to sign off and we'll be done. So Aaron, you were the last to present, so you get to do your 30-second sign off first.
Sure. I think my main comment would be that there's a lot that's not known yet about how to manage clubroot, and our researchers have a lot on the go right now. So I would encourage agronomists and farmers really to keep their ear to the ground, to pay attention to the new research that's coming out, and try to work to include that in your decision making. Just because you believe something about clubroot or blackleg today doesn't mean it'll necessarily be true in 2 years or 5 years from now. So try to stay on top of the research and the new extension messaging, and use that in your hybrid decision making.
Good, thanks, Aaron. Clint.
Yeah, my final message is, don't grow one cultivar across your entire farm. I think that the industry, we're moving more and more to more precision and thinking of fields as management zones, and even getting down to per square foot levels. We need to be thinking more strategically about our varieties that we're growing. And Aaron certainly indicated that we need to think more precisely in a holistic fashion. I know that for 2022, seed decisions are mostly made right now, but we have an opportunity for 2023 that if you do a really good job at spending time in the field, scouting for what are the real yield robbers that you're experiencing, really understand what is happening in those fields, you can select which traits will be able to correct that more specifically for 2023, so that once you start making those decisions in the fall, you'll make the better decisions and have a really good year in 2023. So good luck out there.
Good. Thanks, Clint. Brittany, last word.
Okay, mine's more clipboard specific. Theirs were very broad, great. But I want people to think of clipboard almost like blackleg, not to have such a, I wish there wasn't such a negative stigma around it, so that people could talk about it more. Also look at cultivars and not think that you're going to have a yield drag or it's going to cost more for having clip roots in that cultivar, or sorry, resistance. Ooh. And so I just want it to be more of I want it to be more relaxed for people to talk about it, learn how to manage it, and then we can hopefully get ahead of this pathogen. And not worry about it as much.
Thanks, Brittany.